Hi, y'all. I wanted to introduce you to Pipedream Connect, a new product that we're shipping in preview. This is pretty early, so we're really looking for feedback, first and foremost, from the community about how the APIs work, how the SDK works on Pipedream's end, and just the general developer experience, and also whether this solves real problems for you. We want to make sure we're shipping something that works to actually solve the use case. So Pipedream Connect, we bill as the easiest way for your end users to connect to any API right in your product. And I'll show you what that means in our example app. We'll go through the quick start. But in essence, you can build any integrations directly into your app and then use all of Pipedream's functionality to manage the auth. So, for example, we store credentials securely on behalf of you and you can access them via API. We manage the entire OAuth flow, including token refresh. We provide the full functionality of the Pipedream platform. So you can run Pipedream workflows on behalf of these end users using their auth. So envision you've got your UI, and I'll move to the diagram here so you can see how this works. You build the integrations into your app. Everything starts over here on the left. So you build the integration exactly how you know your users need it. These integrations live in your app. You control the entire UI. You just access Pipedream functionality via SDK and API. So on the front end, you build whatever integration makes sense. If it's a messaging or notifications integration with Slack or Discord or Microsoft Teams, and you want to provide a way for users to integrate that so you can send them messages, you'd build that in your front end. You'd put a button to have the user authorize your access to, for example, their Slack account, and then you'd have them select that channel. Pipedream manages the auth piece of that, and we provide an SDK that lets you launch that app connection flow for any end user. And then you'll see how that gets stored in Pipedream and how you access fresh credentials later. So you can always get a fresh access token for Slack. There's a big backend component to this as well. So the client, your users in your front end are interacting with this pop-up that Pipedream manages to launch the app connection flow. Your backend also talks to Pipedream's APIs to do operations that you need to control server side. So you definitely don't want to make front end level client side requests to Pipedream's API to fetch user credentials, because that API requires that you pass your own Pipedream API secrets so that you connect to the Pipedream API securely. Those operations need to be controlled on your backend. And in the quick start, we talk about some of this security and why we've set this up. But just know that you've got your front end, you control that. You've got your back end that's written in whatever framework you want. We're going to use Next.js for our example app. But your back end manages the main connection to Pipedream APIs to generate user sessions that launch account connections. We'll talk about that. And then fetching credentials, invoking workflows. That all should happen on your back end. So we'll go through this in great detail in an example Next.js app, and you'll see how that works. So end to end, again, you're building the front end, you're managing the connection to Pipedream on the back end, and you can connect to over 2,000 integrations directly through Pipedream, including any API we don't yet have. And so if you're trying to use that app, just let us know. But any of the apps we have on our marketplace are available for use with Pipedream Connect. So you can manage accounts for those users. So let's go through the quick start. This is in our docs. We just went over this. You can take a look at the flow between your front end, back end, Pipedream's API. This gives you a sense of exactly what's happening at each step for end user all the way to Pipedream. But we're just going to go through this here in the quick start. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to actually clone our public repo. And if you're following the quick start, you'll see that in step 3 here. This has our example app that we'll go through, so you can see how everything works end to end. But that takes just about a minute. There's a bunch of files that we ship there for public integration code. So I'm just going to clone that now while we'll go to the next step. So the first thing you want to do is choose the apps that you want to integrate. There are two key app types in Pipedream. Anything with static key-based credentials, and that can be any kind of key. Anything with static credentials, we consider key-based. And to launch app connections for your users for key-based apps, you identify the app by what we call the name slug. And I'll show you how this works. We'll use AWS as an example. So to find the app's name slug, to identify what app you want to launch in your integration, search for the app here, select it, scroll down all the way to the bottom of the authentication section. You'll see the name slug here. Often it's just a fully lowercase identifier. Google Sheets, for example, Google underscore Sheets is the name slug of that. So we replace spaces with underscores. But you can always find the name slug. Sometimes it is slightly different than the app name. So in the marketplace, select the app authentication section. So we're going to use AWS for this first example. Then I'll show you how an OAuth app works, because OAuth apps, you bring your own OAuth client with Pipedream Connect. So in Pipedream, first of all, you'd create your own OAuth client in whatever app you want to use. Here, we're going to use GitHub as an example because it's pretty easy to create OAuth apps in GitHub. If you go in GitHub to settings, developer settings, you'll see the OAuth apps listed here. You can create a new OAuth app, provide this information, and GitHub will generate client ID and client secret for you to use to authorize request to that app. I've got a Connect test app. Client ID is public, so that's fine to show here for this demo. And then we'll generate for this demo a new client secret when we create our OAuth app in Pipedream. So if you're bringing your own OAuth client, you create that client in the app, like GitHub. You then create a client in Pipedream. So if we go to pipedream.com, here on pipedream.com, I go to the accounts section, OAuth clients. I've created a demo GitHub client already, but if I were creating a new one, new OAuth client, select the core app that my client is tied to, give it a name, and then make sure to check this box to enable for Pipedream Connect. You have the ability to control this. If you're creating a client that's used completely privately, you don't have to enable this for Connect. Now, no users would be able to connect to it anyway externally unless you set up this SDK that we're about to use. But for the purpose of this demo, we want it, right? And if you are building Connect-powered apps on your website, you'll want to check this box. Put your client ID and client secret, select your scopes. Again, I've got this test that I'm going to use for this demo. We're going to need a little bit of information about that OAuth app ID here to identify our app. The next thing that you need to set up a Connect app is to set up a project. So everything about Connect, all your end user accounts that you'll store and metadata on your end users is stored in a project. So a project in Pipedream is just a container for arbitrary resources like workflows. I created a demo project. I don't have any workflows in here yet. I build workflows where I want to run back-end logic for my end users. We'll get to that in another video. I'll go to the Connect tab first. The Connect tab gives me a public key and a secret key, and these are how I authorize requests to the Pipedream API. These should be considered secrets. The public key itself is not identifying. You need the public key and the secret key to auth. You should keep both of these secret. You do not need to use the public key in the client. We'll go into how you authorize requests for your end users from the client. But make note, public key and secret key, we're going to use that in our example app. So now let's run the demo. I've hopefully cloned the repo. I want to go into the packages, SDK, examples, next app directory. So this Next.js app has already been configured to run Pipedream Connect, and it's a really simple demo. And we'll go through the functionality and the code so you see how it works. So I'm going to open this in VS Code first, so we get the code open. then let's follow the quick start. So you'll see this information here. Those values for the app IDs and the project public and secret key, we're gonna fill that in our project's environment variables here for our Next.js app. I'm gonna copy .env.example to .env.local, and this will run on the development server that we're about to run for our Next.js app. And then I'm gonna fill in my values here. Pipedream app slug. Again, I want to use AWS here. And later we'll do the GitHub demo with an OAuth app. But for now, I actually don't need to fill in an app ID. That's only required for OAuth apps. And so we'll fill that in a moment, tied to our custom Pipedream OAuth client. But for now, just going to launch a Connect window for AWS so you see how that user interaction works. Public key and secret key I'm going to provide again from here. The secret key can be regenerated, so even though I'm going to show you in this demo, I can regenerate it after we film this video. So now that I've got my environment variable set, the quick start has me go here. So our Next.js app, again, I fill in the values of my environment variables, I install my dependencies, and then I run the development server. So I'm going to run npm I. Again, this is a JavaScript app. Next.js, for those of you who haven't used it, it's a React framework. You don't have to use React to use Pipedream Connect. We provide a JavaScript client, and we go into that in this section on how to connect your test account or how your end users connect their accounts from the front end. We provide this Pipedream SDK, and that lets you initiate this account connection flow. So I've installed the dependencies. I'm going to run the dev server. So this reads from, you see, .env.local. If everything worked and your setup is good, you'll see a few values here. So you can read the full text. This just walks through what is happening behind the scenes, and I'll show you this in the code itself. The first thing you need when you launch an account connection flow in your UI for AWS, for example, or for GitHub, you need to identify your own user, because that's how you map your user to Pipedream. We use your user ID, which from Pipedream's perspective, we call the external user ID. It's your user ID in your app. This is just a UUID I randomly generated, but for your app, it'll be whatever unique identifier you use for your users. So get that in your front end or in your environment. Then the first thing you need to do is when you load your integrations page and you're ready for your user to connect any of your apps, you want to do that securely. The way that we've done this is, I see the docs here. You can tell this is very much a preview product, so we need to fill in this, and I'll show you the docs. The docs are in the quick start. But back here, you create what's called a token with the Connect API, and that token identifies the app that your user is connecting to and their external user ID. This call happens server side, and that allows you to use your project keys to securely initiate a session. This ensures that not just anyone can initiate account connections from your front end. And there's a lot of security that's been put into this. This is one of the ways that you as a user ensure security for your app. So you create a token server side. The quick start shows examples for a number of languages that you might write your backend in. This shows you exactly how you go about making that token request. So when you make a request to create a token, that returns the token and then the expiry. And you can see here, I've just printed this to this demo app. So you see, here's what a token looks like. And by default, it expires after 4 hours. So by the time you generate a token, you give that back to your front end, and then you pass that to the account connection process, which we'll see in a sec. I'm going to show you in our Next.js app where this code lives, so you see exactly how this works. And again, this is described in the quick start here in section 4. So we go into why we create tokens and how these API calls work. So in Next.js, I can run what they call server components that can either server-side render UI code. In this case, we're just using it as a serverless function, essentially, and this runs locally as a part of this Next.js app. So any code you see in this server.ts file under the app directory in that example, that runs on the server, local Node.js. When you ship it to somewhere like Vercel, this would run as a Vercel serverless function. So you can see here I import a couple things from the Pipedream SDK. Create client is the function I'll use to instantiate my API client to Pipedream. Pass the public key, the secret key. We use this for development. You will not have to do this, and this is not in the public documentation. You don't have to pass an API host. It defaults to api.pipedream.com. And then here, this function uses the Pipedream SDK to run connect, token, create. So again, if you don't use Node.js on your backend and you use Ruby on Rails, for example, you'll want to go to the API and SDK reference here, tokens API, create a new token. We describe the HTTP API, and then we give you examples. So if you're running Ruby, you go here, you'd see an example of how to make that post request to create a token for the app your user's connecting and the external ID. Okay. I know this is a lot. I want to step back for a second. This is a one-time process. Once you integrate Pipedream Connect in your app, it'll be trivial to add new integrations. There's a little bit of SDK setup here and a couple of concepts. If you have any questions, you think we can provide better docs on this, more targeted videos, let us know. But the point is that there's a lot of code examples here to help you make that server-side call to create the token in whatever environment you're running on your API or your backend. And once you get that token, you want to return it to your front end, because that's how your front end initiates app connections for your users. You import the create client function from the browser SDK. So the Pipedream SDK ships with a server set of code, just identified by Pipedream SDK, and then a browser set of code. So the create client function here actually takes no arguments. And then you run pd.connect account in your front end. So this is all front end code. In our example Next.js app, that code lives in the app directory page.tsx. And then I'll show you how this works end to end. This is where we end up calling pd.connect account. Okay. Now connect app, connect account actually is what gets triggered. This pd connect account flow right here, that function is triggered on a button click right here. So when I click this button, right, here's the button in the React component or in your HTML. On click, connect account. Does a little validation, but ends up calling connect account with the app. Again, that's passed from our env local file here. You can parameterize it however you want, hard code it in your front end, it doesn't matter. Here, that's provided by the environment. App slug ends up getting passed here. pd.connect account, pass the app, AWS, pass the token that I got. And then once we connect it, you can actually run an on success or an on failure method, and the SDK docs also document this. This is where you can handle the case where the user successfully connected their account or the user failed to connect their account. and we'll trigger these callback functions. And you've got access to the what we call the auth provision ID. It's the account ID. In userland, the account they connect, that is the ID that you get back, tied to a Pipedream identifier. So here again, you can, in this case, I just set it as a value, and you'll see I actually display it on my front end. So connect this account. This loads the Pipedream SDK. I continue. I'm just going to enter random access keys. Don't want to save that. I continue, and I get the account ID here, okay? You can use that then to make API calls. So in a moment, we'll retrieve the account details by ID. I'll actually do that right now, just to do an end-to-end demo. Then we'll go into OAuth. So if you want to set up an OAuth app, you see how that works. So I'm going to use curl locally to do this. There's examples in a number of other languages. Again, we have the TypeScript SDK, so you can just use this nifty get account function, pass an account ID, whether to include credentials, okay? Node.js, Python, etc. But again, there's an HTTP API. I'm just going to call the endpoint. So we use basic auth for the API. And with curl, when you connect to some URL via API, you just pass your public key and secret key in this user parameter, and curl base64 encodes it for you. Otherwise, you'll want to construct this. The example apps, the example code below shows you how to do that. So for curl, again, I'm just going to pass my public key and secret key. I'll get that from envlocal. Curl-u, public key, secret key, api.pipedream.com/v1/connect is the base URL for any Pipedream Connect API requests. And then I want to retrieve account details by ID. The only parameter that I have to pass by default is the account ID. I'm going to get that from my front end over here. Okay. I cleaned that up by piping it to a program called JQ. If you haven't seen that, it's great. Just pretty prints the JSON for us. So I made a request to this ID. It knows the name. It knows the external user ID that I associated with that account. I have some metadata about whether the account is quote unquote healthy. In the background, we're making some requests for mainly OAuth apps to refresh tokens. And that state is an indication of whether the account is able to successfully refresh or not. And then a dead state, after some retries, we kill the account completely. We need to do a better job of surfacing that to developers in the UI. Right now, that information is available via API. We envision webhooks and other things for that as well. App metadata. Notice there's no credentials here because I didn't specify it. So by default, we're not returning credentials, just metadata about a given account. If I wanted to include credentials, I'd set it here, and then I see my test credentials. Okay. So really, really simple request. I can get information by external user ID, which is probably how you'll want to do it. You know your user ID on your end. You can always make requests to get all of the accounts tied to your own user ID. So this is a really simple example too. I'm going to, instead of saying connect accounts, users, I'll get my external ID. Accounts, same thing. I'm getting that same account, but now by external user ID. Again, we provide an SDK for this and code examples in other languages. So I just have to get accounts by external ID, for example. Okay, the final thing I want to do for this demo is to get this OAuth app set up. So back in envlocal, I'm going to put in my GitHub app ID. Okay, OAuth app ID is the ID tied to this GitHub custom OAuth client, my OAuth client for my app. So the idea being you want to create your own OAuth client for your users, so they're authorizing your app. This is where you identify all the details of those OAuth apps in Pipedream. Create a new OAuth client. I created this one already for GitHub, and I've set up the app on the GitHub side again here. I am going to copy this OAuth app ID back in Pipedream. I set this variable, again, only required for OAuth apps. Key-based apps, there's only one version of that. You don't create your own key-based apps in Pipedream. That's why we only needed that for AWS. But in this case, the name select is GitHub. So now I'm saying GitHub is the app. This is my client. Okay, I'll save that. The app will reload automatically for me. And then I am going to refresh. Now, look, connect my account, connects to GitHub. I continue. Oh, I gotta fix that real quick. That's a demo problem. Copy this callback URL, and then I want to instead use that. Okay, so I just created a couple of apps and I forgot, so I had the wrong credentials, or redirect URL. Okay, here we go. Authorize connect test. Authorize. Account connected. Got a new external user ID, so I'm gonna fetch data there. Okay, there we go. GitHub. And I have a fresh OAuth access token, okay? So for OAuth apps, we're constantly refreshing these access tokens. We give you that metadata back, or that data back in the credentials, okay? You also get metadata about the user, like the OAuth ID for their GitHub app, in case you need to identify that user in API requests. So I just want to go back now that we've done this end-to-end. We built a Next.js app. It's got a front end, really simple front end, that just shows you how to initiate account connections, and then a really simple back end that, again, just makes these server connect token create calls. I didn't show you this, but in Next.js apps with server components, I can import any function that I define on the server side. Again, this is running as a Node.js application locally. Server connect token create. Import from server. And then I call that here, and that's how I get access to my token. Now, in your app, you may make an API request with a JOT tied to your user from the front end. However you authorize requests from your front end to your back end, you should do the same for your API. So I'm here just, it's an example app. I'm trusting that the user ID that I've identified on the client is the user. I should add more auth to this app. For simplicity, we don't, but you should, again, however you authorize requests from your front end to your back end, do the same thing here. Securely get a token for a given app and a given user, and then you'll get that token back, and you can kick off that account connection process for your users. In a separate video, we'll show you how to take these credentials and pass them to Pipedream workflows. You'll see in your project, if I refresh, you'll see the external users that you connected here. So this is a great way to troubleshoot your own accounts to start, and then to see any account information, all accessible, again, via API and SDK. So please let us know if you have any feedback in Slack. We'll also post some of these features that we're working on now on GitHub, so y'all can comment there and upvote specific features. But we're really excited to see what you build. And I think the main thing now is we're just trying to simplify this whole process. We know that it's a lot to get started. You should expect a lot of improvements to the developer experience as we also ship new features. But definitely give us feedback on the quick start, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. We're happy to answer any questions. Thanks.